Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to Psychology Performance Professional discussion number 11. We're really pleased to have Jenny Coe on with us this morning to discuss all things coaching, psych, wellbeing. So, morning, Jenny. Morning, Tom.
Morning. Thanks for having me, James and Tom.
Morning. Yeah.
Pleasure. So, we normally start, Jen, with just a little bit of a background. So, if you can give us a kind of overview of your career to date.
Yeah, we'll see where this goes. Pretty unorthodox. Thanks for having me. I have had so from a training perspective, sports psychology, coach development have been the last decade in different spaces and different contexts. And I've had a lovely dual life prior to that as an international basketball player and coach, which at its core taught me everything I know about pressure, uncertainty, and what actually works in the practical sense. Some good, some bad, some stuff I look back on in my career and go, oof, that was you as a coach. Thank God time's moved on. These days I'm in football. So about 9 years ago, they accepted me in the door as a non-football person, which football world are really, really good at doing now, and probably a decade ago, maybe not so much. In my current role, I work with coach developers. So I oversee the development of the workforce and the people who develop the coaches essentially and deliver courses and go into clubs. And I run a consultancy called Impact the Game that was set up with a former head of department and lecturer friend of mine, coach, who said, listen, we've all this content. The world of social media is giving people a lot of information in all shapes and sizes, but I don't know if it's giving it the how. And we were totally aligned on, the what's there in abundance. How do we get to the how? So that's led to courses and some practical ways to connect with information and bridge the gap between coaches and the world of kind of psychology or being psychologically informed. But honestly, everything I do comes back to questions like what helps humans, what helps people do the best work and feel good while they're doing it. And I think that at its core probably didn't materialize until I got really into the coach development side of things and coaches. I was working across a portfolio of about a couple of dozen of sports, and the same stuff was coming up. So, which we might get into today. But yeah, that kind of gives a little bit of a few threads to pull on, I guess, of the different spaces that I've been operating in for a long time.
Yeah, nice. Jen, you started off coaching.
Yeah.
But you're also an accredited sport and exercise psychologist.
Yeah.
So what attracted you to coaching, and then what kind of either a change or a complement of doing the accreditation process?
Yeah, wicked. Good question, Tom. So, and I'm smiling here. So, coaching, and this is the honest truth. In the school that I was in, very sporty school, lucky to have a head principal, head teacher in there who wanted to support the sporting avenue. I came in as a swimmer into the secondary school, and soon realised after that we had some basketball and some invasion sport backing, and that was an avenue I might be interested in going down, but not too sure. And so I used to shoot around or learn or watch in the hall at lunchtime, which is where, the majority of people congregated. And that was my first taste of, would you do, I think I was probably a couple of years in, would you like to play basketball? So I started to play, got the bug, stopped swimming, started playing. And I had some coaches who were deeply passionate. The way they coached sometimes was really helpful and sometimes wasn't. And so that curiosity was sparked to go like, could I be a coach? Could I do better, differently? Totally naive to this expanse of what coaching is at the time. But the negative experiences and the success we were having, I was like, oh gosh, surely we can do this better, differently, right? And then I got into the transition year that we call it a gap year. And I said, I'm going to take up coaching. And again, fortunately, unfortunately, took it up. My sister had come into the school, took her team, her basketball team, and we won loads. And we made the national, I think it was semi-finals or final, bronze medal, whatever we got, a couple of years, cups coming in, loads of people saying how great I was as a coach. And I was like, the ego was totally inflated now because the player, the coach in parallel here. And like I said at the start in the intro, if I looked back on some of those videos, I was basically playing the game for them. I was, minute by minute, up the court, down the court. And it was probably mistaken, or I would argue at the time it was passion. thank gosh the social media wasn't a thing. There was nothing ill-intended, there was nothing nasty, it was all just volume and playing the game for them and no autonomy. But the bug had stuck with me, and I found some mentors and people along the way. So I coached, obviously did some stuff right and had some cool experiences. A couple of girls made it across a pathway to international. A couple of schools I worked with made it to, world level competitions, which is really cool. And there was a deeper sense of connection with what coaching was. But I was again at a crossroads where I'm thinking, I just don't know enough about. And I'm now technically proficient or getting there or have access to people who can mentor and support me. I don't know what's happening in the mind. I don't know what's happening with people. How do I move through this space? And across that coaching journey, early coaching journey, I was in. So I grew up in a very privileged school, as I mentioned, like supported. We had kit. I was a part of a really successful club. So it was like it was almost laid out. The other contexts I worked in were different. And that is where the real deep sense of like, I can support people. They want to be here, or it's a vehicle away from some bad habits and some bad ways of thinking about socializing and stuff. So exercise and everything. And those were the groups that I'd really kind of a deeper sense of purpose and connection with. So I did computing as my first degree. I won't go into in 1990, I won't go down that route, but I did a degree because it was the topical thing to do. And I was so saturated in sport at the time, I wasn't going to do another sporting degree. I was like, I can't, I need to know how to download music and download. So I did computers and design and all of that. And then realized, I was never going to use it. I was going to stay in sport, but there just wasn't, I couldn't see career-wise what was going to happen. But I was again fortunate enough to have a coach who was a psychologist, our national team coach, our local club coach, and just how the language he used, how he positioned things. I wanted more. He became the role model of a coach that I thought, I haven't seen you, because until I got to this level, I wasn't exposed to that type of coaching. And he had a really good balance between technical and tactical balance. I wouldn't say like well-being was the language used, but there was something more around the psychologically informed environment, something around the language, the short, sharp, the whatever. We can go into that, no need. So I then, once I finished that degree, took a little bit of a break and thought, I'm still curious about this. I started in, I think it was 2010, 2011, doing my master's in sports psychology. Now, the interesting part of this was I finished that master's, and in Ireland at the time, there was no accreditation. So I was at the highest level, or I was what I needed to be in Ireland, but there was still a bit of ambiguity about what's next. So of course, in typical me fashion, which we'll chat about over the next 40 minutes, I imagine, I said, well, where can I get accredited? And I had my IT, so I combined them with a bit of support and guidance from a couple of people to look at how we bring psychology into analysis, and became accredited with the IOC as an analyst. And that was brilliant. It was fascinating because, again, to make money in that space, I'm one of the only females in a dressing room. Usually senior men's is where the money is. So that's where I ended up. But I still came back to, is this enough having just a master's? And I didn't know what I didn't know. If you don't know what you don't know. But I was able to use psychology, or what I knew at that time, the minimal amount, to inform some decisions around what we captured, and movement and play. And so it was fascinating. We had loads of interesting moments there. And then I came over here and realized that, I had to get on the route, but it was quite an expensive route early on. It was going to be around the £8,000–10,000. Some of the course wasn't accredited because in Ireland at the time, there was only 2 master's courses. And I felt there was maybe a perception that it was a tight-knit group and you had to really earn your way into that, along with the status of HCPC. So coach development took my fancy and took an interest. And so I could parallel my training and do it a little bit slower over time, and then go into coach development. And that's when I started working across the Olympic pathways. But the psychology, or the well-being and psychology, started to drip itself in more and more into the way of working. So there's the long answer to that question, Tom. You're probably fearful of asking me another question now, but that's part of the journey.
No, it's fascinating because I think probably me and James are similar with sort of coaching related activities and psych related activities. They very much complement each other.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the brilliant answer. It's not like you've sidetracked and gone somewhere completely different. You're using both those skills, experiences to actually become you and the way you work. I thought it was really interesting, just going back to your coaching in the early days. it is quite possible to get success with what we might call suboptimal practice. I saw you sort of reflecting there, going, "Oh, there's no social media." Like, we do see so many coaches controlling and probably more grassroots type coaching, and you see that all the time. They just control the children, and the unfortunate thing is sometimes they win the league.
There's always a curiosity in me to monitor when there's changes, and fortunately, unfortunately, I'm in a sport where changes are happening quite a bit in the head coach manager roles. There is a, I don't have the stats to go with this, but there's a perception and a little bit of insight that when a new coach comes in, they're adding something different, they're adding change, they're wiping away what people may have not liked before. And so people are bought in. And then I'm always curious about that plateau part. Like, what do they need to do then to get beyond the buzz moment? Is it a couple of wins? Is it, meeting and connecting with people? There's definitely coach managers who have moved around the Premier League clubs that I would have maybe followed as a really good way of people management and connection, but can they do the work on the pitch? And when there's like a competitive, or if it's an Olympic spot, if it's in a week by week game, rugby, football, what is needed to find that balance between the well-being of the people to maximize the potential over a long period of time, and the performance that is the demand from the above to say, they lose their funding, or you lose your role, or if they don't play and you don't win, then their career, their money, their monetary value doesn't go up. And it's hard at a point, I think, in the last 8 years I've tried to share and evolve my thinking on this. It's hard to pitch into the future. And that's why I like the performance well-being stuff around the women's and the WSL was, your career in football is a chapter in a very long life, hopefully. So what we don't want is a broken human at the end of that, a person still searching for purpose, a person who's grieving some interactions and behaviors that mean that they may have to go to therapy or more. So they can exist in parallel.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe just building on that a little bit, like I think on a lot of book chapters, a lot of like journal articles, and maybe discussions like this, we can articulate performance and well-being are completely intertwined. And I'd say some of my PhD work suggested that around identity. But what I sometimes find is on the ground, that isn't always as prominent as it is in webinars and books and textbooks and discussions around lecture theatres and seminars and things like that. What do you see some of the challenges? So people want these bodies to perform, that's it. To get 3 points or whatever it is. What sort of challenges you've had over your sort of career without going in too much detail, maybe a theme or something like that? Like, there is a narrative that it's no pain, no gain, all about the winning 24/7 athlete. But we know that's not the case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In short, it was that stint in coming from West Ham on the ground, living and breathing a couple of ways of working, into that WSL role where I was looking to make psychology a mandated role and performance well-being a new role, that I had to look at who the key stakeholders were. So lots of resistance. And I don't think resistance from the majority of people anyway, from a nasty perspective, or whatever word, insert other word there. It was from an ill-informed perspective. So I had to speak the language and connect with, return on investment. If you're investing £100,000 in a player and you want them to play, if they get off a plane on Wednesday and you want them to play against Chelsea on Saturday, there's a couple of things we need to do in advance of that. Or maybe Saturday's too soon. Oh no, you need to, and they want to. So I'm speaking the language, I'm sharing some information and knowledge, I'm drip feeding it over, having patience over a period of time. But yeah, loads of resistance. And some of that came from, a fearfulness of saying, I don't know what you're on about here. And actually, by being into the club and the position I'm in, they're going to see me as weak. They're going to see me as not investing in the tactical stuff, whatever. Fascinating, probably 18 months doing that as well. Fascinating 18 months, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, and clearly made progress there for clubs, people, and obviously yourself as you move through. James, I'm hogging up questions here, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So So your role at West Ham, Jenny, was that
Yeah.
across all the teams? Is that with the male teams, female teams, or
Oh God.
academy, or?
I'd say they want people to do that to do that a volume of work. But no, it was women's first team and then supporting the academy. They were in a really good position to have individuals working or head ofs in each of the kind of key disciplines across the boys academy. We were based on site with the boys academy, so there was a lot of nice interactions and collaborations that happened there, and I would say a lot of cohesion in how we saw psychology and how we could evolve it within that space. Well-being, they have different mandates and compliance to go through around EPPP and all of those, so we didn't have as tight a compliance around psychology, well-being. So I could have a bit more flex to play around with how we might get what we need to do, and that led to some ideas around the WSL role.
Yeah, so this is one of the challenges I'm having. I'm starting to try to set up a similar sort of thing at the Cat 3 club I'm at the minute, the boys academy. So you kind of touched on it there. So, it's you go in and deliver a CPD to coaches at the start of the season, you think, and Tom's mentioned about webinars and what have you there, and you kind of think everyone's just going to buy into it straight away. But yeah, in reality, it is a long game, isn't it? It's a marathon, not a sprint. And, how did you, that's one of my frustrations is trying to not convince, but try and get coaches like you say who may be more obsessed with the tech tac stuff that they've done on Coach Ed. A lot of the FA badges don't really touch on psychosocial stuff, apart from maybe the AYA. So that I think that's a bit of a deficiency in the Coach Ed side. But how would you go about kind of trying to, like you mentioned, key stakeholders? What sort of process would you follow to try and influence them across the season?
Yeah, I think there's so if you look at the last three roles I've had, so there's an on grass, so those who are working in clubs approach. Then there was a zoomed out approach across, the organization, if you like, or the league. And then in my current role, I'm across workforce where we understand what well-being is. It's just on the periphery. Right? We're really on the periphery of that. And we're also talking about 1,000 coach developers, soon to be 2,000 to 4,000 in the next couple of years. So that's a bigger kind of strategic ask, but all at the same, who am I speaking to? What are we speaking about? And I think the primary part of that was doing a little scope initially in the environment of who understands what, who's where, who do I have a little bit of an ear with initially, and that is the patience game, the long game. Thinking about, is it by stealth I drop a paper by somebody? Is it a stat? One of the angles I went to was being so informed, like knowing as much as I could about as much as I could from whomever, from all the experts, researchers, people on the ground, gathering what was the latest work that was done, where was it done, so I can quote reference people who are familiar. It was done in the Premier League. Oh, okay, I'm listening. Or it costs this much. Okay, I'm listening. Or globally, but whatever. So some of those examples and being really informed. So I would lead with 1 in 4 mental health, 1 in 7 loneliness, 1 in 7 neurodiverse, those kind of things, like in a room of 25 players, this is happening, this is here, and go like, how are we going to talk about this and deal with this? What do we need to shift and change? The tactic in the early days, say tactic, it sounds very, very meditative, but it was, can I have a budget? Can I put well-being in my title? Can I have a budget? And can you make me accountable? Okay, where's that spend gone? Let me tell you where that spend is gone. And then I think in the very, very basic sense of it is having conversations about well-being and making it tangible and not fluffy. And that goes back to what I was saying to Tom about the language and who you're speaking to. Like, it's not just being happy. And that is what I, would hear around on the ground when at West Ham in various pockets would be, are they smiling? Are they happy? And I'm kind of saying, it's more about autonomy. It's more about connectedness. It's more about the feeling valued. Are we doing that collectively? And even for staff, do they feel it? And they'd be, oh, it's not about me. It's not about me. No, it definitely is about you, because they are part of you. They sense everything. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the myths about sports side, because it's all kind of fluffy and about trying to make people feel good. And, I think it is about that to an extent, but it's also the challenge side of it that people seem to, you're not trying to put people in a comfort zone all the time. You're trying to get them out of it, but supporting them through that. So yeah, was the decision to call it performance and well-being, was that driven by yourself? Did you try and avoid the term psychology a little bit more there?
Yeah, I tried to have them as completely separate, which that in itself was a really interesting conversation, because there was, gosh, where to start with it? I will keep it brief, but there was lots of conversations with the psychs that we had working in across the women's game, and some that I knew working across the men. Some of the conversations identified a kind of free-flowing, run your own way of doing things. And so by putting some structure in, there was a bit of a radar or an eyebrow raised, going like, what does this mean for me in my job? Like, I just kind of do my job very well, mind. They're, well-intentioned people doing really great work, but nobody really touched the psychs, and nobody really knew what they were doing. They were kind of connected to a team, but kind of separate. And it's an area that people are intimidated by, the title. So I thought some of the kind of learnings and insight from the journey prior to that, some research, was that if the player care space is getting people in who maybe have a really loose remit in the JD, how can I look at something that doesn't need you to be 10 years qualified, that could complement and support the psychologist, that could alleviate some of the workload? And this is more of a personal angle, that I saw psychologists having to do way more of light touch conversations, which can be very valuable, but bleed into other areas of therapy, safeguarding, career and transitions. And so when I started to talk to psychologists who are working in the game, who are worried about or confused about this, why are they separate, why they're not together, I'm saying, well, then they become one person. Then the club just has one person to do all of this stuff. And in the framework we created for the performance well-being, I had female athlete health in there, because that was a real prominent feature, and it still is, and they're world leading in the work they're doing. But that isn't the primary responsibility of the sports psychologist, to know the insides and outsides. They can have a conversation, and if the performance well-being person can have that initial conversation and start to signpost across career transitions, onboarding, female athlete health, physical well-being, then maybe there's almost like a triage in the performance well-being role that says, gosh, this is beyond my remit. The psychologist would be great to have that conversation in more depth, and they can be connected and hit the ground running, and there's two people feeding into a bigger team. So that was the method in the madness of it. But it's not saying that there's not a really tight Venn diagram that has loads of overlap,
Yeah. So how did you find that in terms of MDT work? Would you think it was quite acceptable getting everyone in the room together and discussing this and how this might relate to what goes on the grass?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And maybe I was fortunate, maybe it was something about the approach, the people in front of me, but there was a positioning of what it is and how we do it, and not forcing it. And in the MDT for the 3 years of West Ham, we just had processes. And I'm not really, well, I say that now, I'm saying it probably 8 or 9 years, I'm not a really process-driven person. But when you're in a certain level of resource, under-resourced usually, when there's a feeling of uncertainty or ambiguity about who you are, what the role is, like I've sometimes called a mind reader. And I walked into a room, I was like, no, I'm just saying hello. I'm not reading anything about your body language, like there was like, oh. So it was how we could get in a room and diffuse or add clarity to anything that was building or had historically been carried into the room, making people feel valued, their voice being heard, having clarity on the frequency and duration of those meetings and the agenda. So nothing was coming in from the side. Nobody was being bombarded or embarrassed, or they didn't want to speak, or they didn't want to share anything, or they had nothing other than the initial ask to share them. We wouldn't. So that's kind of the setup part of it. And then the last part to offer here is, and this was a big challenge and probably still is, and I know I'm not in that space, is the confidentiality. So a real big issue with the ethical stretch and challenge of what information we hold, how clear we are at setting boundaries and clarity on what the role is at the start of the season, trust coming into the core of that, with players seeing you walk with management, they think, oh, I had a chat with her this morning now, she's telling them, look, and they're looking over at me, oh, that's it. And I would see, and I would feel I would feel a little bit of distance from that person, because where the well-being room was, you'd see players coming in and out, and from one day to another, they might not look at you, or they might not chat. Then the next day they'd want to share everything. But then I'd identify that maybe I had a chat with the general manager or the coach or someone. So it was constant, where am I with you? Where are we? And then reinforcing that we have confidentiality, and then batting back to senior management that, like, we're just not going there. I'm just not going to tell you any information about that person, and making sure that I had signpost systems airtight on that narrative as well.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. You kind of answered there about, then how do you go back to the players? But yeah, just reinforcing that it is confidential. Yeah, go on, Tom. So I cut across you there.
No, not at all. Yeah, I've had that. So I'm at Doncaster, and I've got this like dual role of again, a lot of people in Cat 3s have dual roles, like doing some academy site work as a CPIP practitioner, and then doing some coach development work. And you're constantly in that space of, what did you meet so and so the other day? I saw you walking around the stadium with them the other day. How's it going? And you're in this like dilemma in the moment of like, come on now, and we're just looking at trying to go to a position where, and hear me out on this, but let me finish on this one. Going to a position where that we're going to just flip confidentiality slightly, as in they are more open conversations with players, but they are in control of what remains confidential.
Lovely.
So it's not immediately all confidential and everything's closed off. We might share it if it's going to, we feel it will support you. We feel we might want to go to your coach to help the coach help you. But if any part of this you want it to be confidential, it is without a doubt, and you're in control.
Yeah.
And we're trying to flip it a little bit, but keep the ability to be confidential with the player.
Yeah.
So they're totally protected at all times, and we're just kind of working through what that documentation looks like.
Yeah.
But I've had plenty of those dilemmas until we get to that point of so-and-so, all right?
Yeah.
And it's really difficult in the moment to deal with. But what we've tried to do in the club, and as I think you've probably done it, like a lot of on-grass visibility of psych. So just being around the sessions and being visible and knowing the players and building a relationship up and knowing the coaches.
Yeah.
I think one helps psych, but two makes it visible to parents, coaches, players who are around.
Yeah.
And I think that prominence needs to happen probably as much as possible across as many areas of provision as possible. Just being around, because sites, like I say, people didn't know what they did.
Yeah. Burrowed away in a little room over there.
Yeah, it's just done in a little room somewhere.
Yeah.
And that high visibility. But then I suppose one of my questions would be, if you're trying to promote that, have you come across any resistance from sort of coaches and other practitioners? Are like, well, what's so and so doing stood at training?
Yes. Yeah. Full stop. Yeah. Some of it was the coach's vulnerability.
Yeah.
Vulnerability. But when I first arrived in football, and I have seen this in Olympic sports, but it's just framed in a different way. I think the positioning of it is a little bit different, and it's accepted. It's just not available in abundance as much as needed. But there's something about how I started. I think anyway, this was probably a help to remove it from the class. So again, grabbing my my stats or my insight from the data we had, and that was like, well, we're doing X minutes on the grass, we're doing X minutes in the gym, we're doing X minutes traveling, and we're doing X minutes working on how we become whatever word they more confident, more resilient, or just engaging with people, or having more resilience across context. So whatever words were familiar and whatever words would be batted back. So for example, this myth started to float around that in the women's game, they score the second goal within 5 minutes of the first. And I said, okay, right. And then it would be, Jen, you need to be working with a few of the, right, okay. And so we go and look at when the subs were made. And we go and look at cognitive overload and what information was, burrowed away in that, and all of that pattern, to be then able to sit down and have a football conversation with psychology underpinned or embedded in it. And then say, well, listen, doing 60 minutes a week in a classroom, about something that we think might be helpful but isn't actually relatable with somebody who isn't football and not on the grass. And then I had people who were really accepting and open in the rapport that I'd built, because I worked really hard on connecting, not in a false way, just like building the rapport, feeling safe and connected with somebody, to then say, hey, listen, I'm going to take the hour that I'm currently allocated and I'm going to break it up into 10-minute sessions. So we're going to do 10 minutes before every training session on something. What would you like it to be? What do you think? What's the purpose of the session? So all that, the method in that madness was to say, well, I see S&C being very much in the mix, in the lead in some cases of the design of the practice, and rightly so from a physical prep perspective, but no measure of the psych and where the mental side would come in, just a reactive way of dealing. So then I became in those conversations in practice design, and then we brought that to the side of the pitch, and then the staff decided to join into some of them. So their rapport was being built and they were being a bit vulnerable, but also I think one of the key things is, and it not necessarily like all of the time, but players feel safe, I think, when the coach is regulated and present, and they need, from a coach developer hat, they need to be ready for the training session. And in the case where they were former players or have doing this job for a really long time, the habits that are there maybe need to be discussed and addressed. And this was a way of bringing them together. So it wasn't called psychology sessions. It wasn't called psychology anything. It was Jen and the team. And Jen, when you do your 10 minutes here, I'll integrate here, but I'll also. And then after the session, we'd always have an end of day or end of session. Yeah. And it would become, how did you think that opening helped? What did you pick up on? And there was always something. They had fun with someone, they chatted with someone, they learned something about someone. And then we reinforced that key message throughout it. So yeah, I suppose well-being modeling in the psychology psychology space is like if coaches normalize talking about load and how they feel and the certain words that maybe have big, spotlight words and spotlight meaning, and we unpick what they mean or what they look like in behaviors, then there's a more kind of, I don't know, there's more of acceptance around the entry into the big psychology space,
Yeah, definitely. I really like that idea, like bringing coaches together and everyone's planning the session for the boys and all the girls, and you coming together and sharing ideas, and that brings that connectedness with the coaches that then bring it to the players, don't they?
Yeah.
And I think that's really useful. We still run some workshops at Doncaster, like 30 minutes. That's still pretty snapshots, but we invite the coaches into that, and we invite them to help plan that.
Brilliant.
So have you got any clips of this sort of topic, or the coaches might just bounce off the topic and go, right, so remember we've got this game on Saturday and maybe this idea could be brought in, and then I try and support the coach with ideas of practice design, and then I'm out on the pitch. So you're trying to get that connected feel all the time.
Yep.
Which 5 or 6 years ago took a little bit of negotiating with stakeholders, but now it's normal that coaches are in and around those sessions all the time, and I'm in and around their sessions, and it kind of seems to work. Go on, James.
So just you kind of touched on a lot of things that me and Tom are sort of working towards at the minute. So working through coaches and trying to get psych on the grass. I do think that classroom sessions are still vital, but like you say, unless you've got that connection with what it looks like on the pitch, people struggle to buy into it a little bit. So what sort of advice should you give in terms of how you assess the players? Obviously, this is one of the big challenges, isn't it? We're looking at stuff that's abstract and intangible compared to, through your performance analyst background, you can technical, tactical, physical, quite easy to get sort of objective data on. So what sort of methods do you use to assess the players? And how would you get that into? I mean, we're looking at kind of periodizing it into the curriculum, and like Tom said, working through coaches. What would your approach be to that?
Oh, it's a good one. The assess word catches me, just because the connotations that come with it, the pressure that comes with it, and particularly in this, I say football, I don't want to be broad paint stroke on it, but there is everything else is measured really tightly. And so how do you prove your worth? And there is from a psychometric perspective, there was a lot of fruitful conversations over the years about, well, if I just do this, then I can show movement, or I can show where do we start the season on well-being? Do we do well-being questionnaires? Do we look at movement in an individual development plan? But similar to coach development, I will come back around, similar to coach development, I find the argument is, how do you measure, how do you value a conversation? So I think it's looking for change and looking for ways to capture that change over time. Whether it's through psychometrics, whether it's through various other profiling that you can do. I'd be hesitant, as you can feel, to label and name one or two things that I'd hang my hat on, because I've tried a lot over the years, and I don't want to give anyone, especially after doing a series of myths books and things that have grabbed traction to commercialization over the years. But whatever works for people in the comfort and whatever the ask is. But my feeling around assessment is, why are we doing it? Who are we doing it for? What are we assessing? And if it is change, and we have a COM-B model, we have something that we might look at over time, or transformational change, and is it related to their individual development plan? So if you go back to performance well-being, one of the things we said is the onboarding process would have a conversation around those 4 components, and it would be looking at, when they onboard, what processes do we have in place, and then evaluating that. So asking them how they found that, asking them how valuable that was, who would be the person that would be doing that. When we're looking at self-reporting, are we really unpicking the value of self-reporting? And we started to work with a sleep expert in West Ham, James, and it was just a silly catch that he caught me on, because I got caught up in this. I'm excited about the role I have. I want to show that we're doing some stuff, and we'll do a well-being couple of questions. So I, far and wide researched it, had our questions that we're going to do, had an app, everything in place, and gave a deadline of 8:30 in the morning. So when you wake up and you have whatever you need to do, you have it until 8:30. Usually they were in by that time anyway, or 9 o'clock, and then they would be on the pitch or doing prehab and activation and stuff. And James came in, he was like, why 8:30? And I was like, because then, all of our MDT can have a look and have a chat. And in my mind, it was like, well, the physio can have an organic conversation in the corridor. They can show in a space for the women's game at the time, where there was stuff about everything coming at them, surveys about bra support and female shoes and grass and air and whoops and auras and all of this. Very conscious of the amount of questionnaires and asks that were coming at them. So we said, make sure that it's really clear what we're gathering, why we're gathering it, who looks at it, and then look at the change over time in what they share. So that was a measure initially of how many people completed it, and what they chose to share, and the language they used. But I was still caught in maybe a little bit of a you don't know what you don't know. So James comes in and he's like, well, some of the research says that, by 11 o'clock, we should identify whether we've had a good night's sleep, not first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
Caught me, so yeah, I think there's something around, for me, it feels less about assessing and more about noticing and responding.
I think we've had this conversation recently with something John Nazori brought up, who runs the Mind Room. That do people want a return on investment, and how do we show that? I think sports science generally had that problem maybe 20 years ago, and that seems to be the contemporary sort of issue for sports psych. How are we showing we're adding value? I'm interested in, obviously you've got a performance analyst background as well as pretty much everything else that's going. So so the recent paper from Ben Ashdown and colleagues who we had on the discussion before, looking at how we can maybe use performance analysis to try and maybe get around that and use a little bit more of an objective measure of performance on the pitch, and how we can maybe use that to measure psychological metrics. Is there anything that you've kind of experienced around that?
Only a light touch now. I won't share to have gone into the depths of it, but what some of the early conversations with players would be, while we were in that stage of supporting the players to understand more about psychology and the different approaches that a psychologist might have, and how they might experience or have experienced previous psychologists who might speak more in a room. Like there was, I'm getting to the point, but I'll feed into how that came about. So we're sitting in a room and someone might say, can you just fix me for the weekend? Can you just give me something tangible? And so they're drawing me towards, in my mind, some CBT, some ways of somebody else fixing them before, and I might want to take an ACT approach and share with them that eventually we might go this direction, or if you share with me, this is so a conversation about what it is, how different approaches might help, into a space where in some cases I became the moan person. And so I would say to them, the analyst hat kicking in the background, I would say, like, what's your high speed running at? So it'd be like, I'm not playing, he hates me, I'm not rotating, I'm useless, whatever. And I'd be listening away, and then I might say, I'd have a good rapport established at this stage, so, and not to sound flippant on it, where's your high speed running at? What's happening in the gym? Where are your other stats? And in that conversation, I realized they weren't actually, it was a passing off to others. So I started to work closer with the analyst to go less a 24-page post-game report and more about the individual and looking at what was connected to their IDP. So where he had capacity and space and knowledge and whatever else, need permission, I guess, to look at the core stats we were looking at as a team, opposition, and then elements of the individual that we'd tag. So they had a personal, bespoke little feedback. It also batted back some of the, where WSL didn't own the stats. So you had a number of different organizations globally started to do loads of stats, but the operational definitions weren't aligned. And so momentum to one and momentum to another read completely different, both visually in a graph and language. So the players then would hop on all these multiple apps and see various ratings of themselves, etc. So we kind of got rid of all of that and said, well, here's our point of truth here. Have a conversation about it. Always a conversation. So we brought loads of analysis in, but also tried to empower the players to say, hey, listen, we can't get to parts of you moaning about something. We can have an offload, but you need to own your journey. And why I'm saying that is, I was, fortunate enough in other spaces, I would say primarily individual sports I worked in, because of the intensity of the interaction and the access. But like, you look at somebody who's in, who's a triathlete or a climber, for example, or in archery, like, they know everything about themselves. They know what's going on. They know who they need. They know what conversation with the MDT, even cycling experience, even though it might be with a team, they know at 14 and 15 in a pathway where the bike feels slightly off. I need to go and change a wheel. I'm on a 10,000 pound bike or 5,000, whatever it is, changing a wheel for, there's no parents around doing it for them. And then they're coming back and they're racing at 40k around a track. Like, there's that level of independence where you're saying, get everything you need to get in order, and then come and have a conversation about the performance element. It's not saying I batted away conversations, don't get me wrong there, but I did see that creeping in as like, will you come and just help me get on the pitch? Sorry, there's a long-winded answer, James, but
autonomy is key, isn't it?
Yeah. No, that's really nice. That's really nice. I'm conscious we've got day jobs and and days to go. I'm going to maybe ask two quick ones to maybe sort of close it a little bit, if that's all right. And it just your immediate response. So one's around if you're a coach thinking about integrating some kind of psych and raising the awareness of psych, what would be one or 2 points of advice for coaches? Because they might not, like say, they don't know what they don't know all the time. So it's like, what would be something that a coach could do to start to think about or integrate some kind of psychology within their activities?
Okay, if I can shift it slightly, the first answer I'd give is just get to know your psych, right? Get to know them. And I made a couple of points on this one because I think in the current role around coach development and thinking about well-being, psychology and all that, here's a couple of things I was thinking about. Burnt out coaches can't create learning environments for their players. So without giving like practical examples, know your psych, have a conversation about that. The coaching role is emotionally and cognitively demanding. So without well-being, coaches become reactive and not responsive, and the players pick up on that. Ask for support from the psych or somebody else to go, how do I behave? What are you noticing? Coaches often pour everything else And it's particularly in football, but across loads of sports, sleepless nights, and forget to resource themselves. So that analogy of oxygen mask first, or whatever works for you in well-being, like know your triggers, know your values, know what's important to you and how you're behaving. And again, use the information expertise of a psychologist to be the soundboard initially. And then self-awareness and self-compassion is better decision making.
Love it. Right. And then the other one would be psych going into maybe an academy talent development space. What are some of their quick wins to raise their profile within the organisation that could help them going in?
That's a very good question. There's a whole flurry of things that have come at me. So somebody asked me this question recently on a webinar, and my gut just spoke, my head spoke first, or my heart spoke first, sorry. And it was, you are good enough going in. You are qualified and you are good enough.
Yeah.
The little bit of a floater that goes around is like, if it doesn't align with your values, the environment, just leave. Not every sports psychologist is in that position. They need a job. Or if they're training, they need hours. So I'm not saying you stay in toxic environments, but you need to have like one non-negotiable, two non-negotiables, then maybe a few more. And if the others are broken, then where's your line of leave? So have a support structure. Definitely, whether it's supervision because of your training, or it's just a good role model or a good friend, like that you check in regularly with, and not be afraid to share, like, I did this. So not even from a supervision. So have a good support network around you. And from a practical sense, getting embedded, I would ask questions really early on about what's expected and needed with as many people as you can.
Yeah.
What is your previous experience with a psychologist? How would you work in the medical space, in the analysis space, in the technical space, with senior management, GMs, head of, sporting directors, whatever that is, and get the meetings in early, hear what they are saying, listen intently, make your notes, and then see by the language that they've used where you're at with them, to then you can go to your players and your plan and write out your, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you for those insights. James, are we
just
full time?
I'm just going to give you a little plug, Jenny. So I've got this book. You can't see the blurs on. It's on the list. I've not read it yet. Myths of Sports Coaching. So you've done Myths of Sport Performance and Women Working in Sport as well. Is that right?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, thanks, James. And we have one coming out this summer, which might be better for your, or more exciting for your audience, is Myths of Sports and Exercise Psychology. Comes out this summer. So it's some excellent work gone into that. Again, as patterned with all of the books, Amy and I are co-editing the brilliant work of, 50, 60 people by those 3 books. So if you haven't had a dive into them, definitely do. And I'm happy to promote them because I feel it's other people's work. We're sharing.
But yeah, we've also got impactthegame.com is your website as well. So yeah, it's really insightful to talk all day about this stuff. So thank you so much for coming on. Anything else from you, Tom?
No, Mega, thank you very much. Really enjoyed that. And thanks for giving your time and your insights. Fantastic.
That's cool. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all the work that you're doing.
Cheers, Jen.